Thank you, Colin. Good morning. Like Colin said, my name is Jaylyn Suppah. I am a member of the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs. I do reside in Warm Springs, which is about 2 hours south from here. I'm also a descendant of the Yakama Nation and Shoshone-Bannock and then Cree Canadian. So I wanted to talk, because everybody heard, I'm going to read what I read last night, but I wanted to talk about some of the points that I felt like might have been missed. So I talked about how I don't do these. I've only done these a handful of times. And when I spoke last night about a call to action and for us to move past words and land acknowledgements, because when land acknowledgements started, there was an intention behind them, and then they became co-opted. And all of a sudden it became this performative action that people were doing. And so a lot of folks from the indigenous and tribal community said, we're done doing that. And so the reason I said yes to this, I think, speaks to the relationship that I have with George, with Colin, with Heather, with MED. I would not be up here if I didn't have that relationship with them. And that's the important part for me is I don't do these. I've only done them a handful of times in the last 5 years. I actually wrote a piece on it of like why these are harmful. And I think they have to be really done with intention. And so I just wanted to speak to that, and I wanted to thank them for asking me to do this. I did tell them that I usually do say no, but again, it's about the relationship, and that is very important to me, to my organization, and that's clearly very important to George, Colin, Heather, and MED. And so I just wanted to speak to that. This is an example of what relationships can do and how we can start moving and making change. And then I also wanted to just talk about, you all heard me list the 9 tribes of Oregon. And I wanted to speak to why I list all 9 tribes when typically you'll hear about in that area, so like Portland area, you'll often hear certain like 3 to 4 tribes listed. I don't like to do that. In any acknowledgement that I've done, I've always listed all 9 tribes. Plus I talk about the folks that aren't recognized by the federal government, because I think it's important, because I think when we start talking about whose land was what, and again, going back to what I said yesterday about land and how that can be perceived as ownership, which is why I use territorial acknowledgements, and I speak about our land in the terms of territories, because my family moved in this territory across the region within Oregon and across Washington and then down into Eastern Oregon towards Idaho. And so I list the 9 tribes because I don't know for a fact that they were not in this area. And so I do not want to create division amongst tribal nations. And so I give respect to every single tribal nation, and as well as the ones that aren't recognized, who chose to not be recognized or just aren't recognized because of the federal government. And so I try to make sure that I'm very broad and open, because I cannot say that the Burns Paiute was not in this area. The Celilo Falls was one of the biggest trade centers on this continent. And so we can't say that. And so I want to be very respectful, because I think when we start saying this was these people's land, that creates division amongst tribal nations, and I refuse to be a part of that. So I will read what I read last night. So majority of you heard this. This land we now call Oregon is the traditional homeland of the original indigenous people since time immemorial. Through 500 plus years of genocide, racism, and oppression, indigenous people and their descendants are still here, and we recognize their strength and resilience as the first people of this land. We acknowledge and honor that the Portland area is located within the ancestral territories of indigenous peoples who have protected these lands and waters since time immemorial. Historically, there were many indigenous people who shared this land long before state lines, colonial borders, and federal recognition. The state of Oregon honors the government-to-government relationship with the 9 federally recognized tribes, who are the Burns Paiute Tribe, Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians, Confederated Tribes of Grand Round, Confederated Tribes of Siletz, Confederated Tribes of Umatilla Indian Reservations, Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, Coquille Indian Tribe, Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians, and the Klamath Tribes. And we must remember and acknowledge there are many unrecognized tribes, such as Celilo Village, who live on the Columbia River. They continue to live in their traditional territories and fought to remain in their traditional homelands. We offer this territorial land acknowledgement in gratitude for all those who have come before us and those cultivating respectful, intentional relationships today and into the future. In recognition of the historical and ongoing legacy of colonialism, and in commitment to work together towards a more just and equitable future in protection of our shared connection to these lands and waters. Recognizing this relationship is the first step in acknowledging Oregon's true history and understanding the important work that needs to be done moving forward. I leave you with a challenge to push yourself and your families, your organizations, your business, your communities to live beyond words. I am always asked, what can I do? How can I work better with tribal nations, tribal communities? And I actually have a training on that. But some of my suggestions are educating yourself and others, volunteering, resource sharing, funding, ensuring you are including tribal nations and our tribal communities, developing policies that ensure tribal nations and our tribal communities are a part of and not an afterthought, and supporting Indigenous business, artists, vendors, professionals. And there's so many other ways you can, we didn't get to do this. However, I was talking to Seattle last night, and I wanted to put in so I don't know if you all are aware, Seating Justice has a fund called the Choosh Fund, which goes to Warm Springs because Warm Springs has water issues. We wanted to get the QR code up here, but I didn't talk to Colin, so here's the plug. If you want to know a way to support tribal nations, those are examples. The Choosh Fund, which you can find on the Seating Justice website. There's also the Ambio Fund, which is for the Klamath tribes. There are various ways you can support tribal nations, and the Choosh Fund is an example of that. There is all the information on the Seating Justice website. I was trying to have it up here, but I totally forgot. Had an extra drink last night, so. And I just want to finish with thank you all for your work, and I hope that you lead by example with your actions.